Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, oh, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Hello, and welcome to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week we are discussing X-rays. Come along for the ride this week as I ask, X-rays, how did that happen? All right, back for another episode 34, doing X-rays this time. Just gotta do a little intro housekeeping before we go ahead to the topic. We'll tell you guys what I'm reading right now. I'm about halfway through with Seth Rogen's book called Yearbook, which is essentially a biography of his life, which is pretty cool because I've always been interested in what makes him tick. So that's been an interesting book. Somebody left a review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and so since they did that, I'm gonna read it off here, and if you want yours read, you got to leave one in order for that to happen. So this guy left a 5-star review. His name's Aleph Tiberinus. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, sir, or ma'am, or however you identify. But it says, check it out. Great show to listen to if you love history. The eps are bite-sized, fun, and informative, and random new topics every week. And that is true, and thank you. Once again, that is what we aim to do here. Is just keep it short, relatively short, and just have talk about different stuff every week. And like I said, if you want yours read on here, drop us a review. It doesn't have to be 5 stars for me to read it, but it's also dope if it is. But yeah, without further ado, let's learn about some X-rays, find out how they happened. So before we get too deep into the idea of X-rays, we have to cover a couple topics that I feel like might make it a little bit easier to understand what I'm saying, because to be honest, I barely understand what I'm saying. So I want to lay out a few definitions that will hopefully make this a little bit easier to process. And if you've been listening for a while, I've done this before. I do this when there's like science-y type topics because I'm not really a science person, but I do enjoy it. I just it hurts my brain to really think about it for too long. And the vocab kills me too. So just a couple quick definitions and then we'll be on our way. Okay, X-rays. X-rays are a form of electromagnetic radiation with wavelengths shorter than those of ultraviolet light. A cathode is a negatively charged electrode, see what I'm saying here, as of an electrolytic cell, I believe, a storage battery, or an electron tube. It is the opposite of an anode. Radioactivity, and I believe this may be our last one, so hang in there with me. It's a spontaneous decay of the nucleus of an atom by the emission of particles, usually accompanied by electromagnetic radiation. Now that was probably the best definition I gave there. Just reading that, you can just feel that radioactivity. And so these, basically, I guess the measure of radioactivity can sometimes either be expressed in becquerels or curies. And interestingly enough, those are named after the two people who had a lot to do with discovering and finding radiation. I mentioned the Curies later. I don't know if I mentioned the Becquerel or that his story that much. I think he's a French guy who had some things to do with it. I remember the name. I don't know if it's in here, if it made it into the actual cut. But most radionuclides have multiple forms of radioactive emissions and are classified according to their principal decay modes. And so the most common types of radiation are alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. And so all of this stuff kind of goes hand in hand. And so I'm going to go from radiation to radium. And the history of radium is that it naturally occurs in uranium and also thorium. Radium is not necessary for living organisms. Besides its use in nuclear medicine, it has no actual commercial applications. Don't at me if I'm wrong. At me if I'm wrong, I guess, but that's just what it said. If you're wondering why we're saying all this, because I'm trying to lay the groundwork for X-rays. You know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to do. It may seem like I'm kind of going to left field a little bit, but it all connects. Trust me. So yeah, radium in the form of radium chloride was discovered by Marie Pierre Curie in 1898 from ore mined in the Czech Republic. See, that's what I mentioned about the Curies earlier. And they published their discovery in the French Academy of Sciences, and they were able to isolate radium in a metallic state. And this was done, like I said, by Marie Curie and an André Louis Debierne. Beautiful name. Okay, and so we finally get to X-rays in 1895, and they were discovered by a man named Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. He was a professor at Würzburg University in Germany, and he discovered it by accident. And he named them X-rays to underline the fact that their nature was unknown. So to him, it was just like like some sci-fi stuff. X-rays. We don't know. It's X. Wilhelm observed a fluorescent glow of crystals on a table near his cathode ray tube. The cathode ray tube was a glass bulb with positive and negative electrodes in it, and when the air in the tube left and a high voltage was applied to it, a fluorescent glow appeared. It's like some real highbrow sciencey stuff here happening. And when he saw this, he put black paper around the bulb and noticed that the light still passed through. This led him to believe that a new type of undiscovered ray was emitting from this bulb. See, that's why all these definitions were good, because when I read this the first time, I had no idea what a cathode ray tube is. And if you don't know what it is, what are you picturing right now? I mean, tell me. If you don't know what a cathode is, what do you see? But yeah, after this, he found that the ray could pass through a lot of things and then cast a shadow of them, and human tissue was one of those objects. And one of the first humans to ever be X-rayed was his wife, Bertha. Good old Bertha. And there's a picture, I believe it's of her hand. He did her hand. It's like one of the first X-rays ever. It's pretty interesting. I may post a picture if I can go back and find it. So we do mention Becquerel. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm sure that's not how you pronounce it. But in 1896, a French scientist by the name of Henri Becquerel discovered natural radioactivity, and so that's why the two different ways you describe radioactivity or measure them is in Becquerels or Curies. It's like it's actually kind of cool. There's not that much stuff that's like that literal when you think about it, or there probably is, but so that's how we got X-rays, or that's how X-rays were discovered. And so there's a lot more about, because like X-rays to me are just like I know nothing about it. You know what I mean? That's why I did this episode, because I was like, I'll find out some information, and it's interesting. So the next thing we're gonna cover is the safety of X-rays, and that's just like, because I've always wondered, there's always that joke about the people you go in and get the X-ray, and the person who's X-raying you either leaves the room or like hides behind some like big machine or something like that. And you're like, is this that safe? And like it is and it isn't. And when I found out from doing like actual research. So around 14 days after the announcement of the discovery of X-rays, Friedrich Otto Walkhoff, these names, he took the first dental radiograph, right? So 2 weeks after they discovered what X-rays were, this guy was like, put that in my mouth. I mean, you can't make this up. He took an ordinary photographic glass plate, wrapped it in a rubber dam, held it in his mouth, between his teeth and tongue, and then laid on the floor for 25 minutes. That's almost a half an hour. Walkhoff said that those 25 minutes of exposure were torture to him. That's why I say it's not like 5 seconds or 2 minutes or 5 minutes. But the exact nature of this torture was not described. But as we'll read on, you can almost imagine what this guy was going through, laying on the floor with that thing in his mouth. Later in 1896, Walkhoff succeeded in making extra-oral pictures with an exposure time of 30 minutes, so he bumped it up a little bit, and he noticed a loss of hair on the side of the head of some of the patients that he used this on. And like I said, that will be a pattern that we will see continue to develop. Okay, and so yeah, I found some other instances of people just like early on, before anybody knew, and it's like they didn't know. So, or I don't know, it's to hear all the different ways people tried these X-rays and some of the bad things that happened. I'll read a couple different instances to you. That the first instance has to do still with our good old friend Mr. Walkhoff, Otto Walkhoff. So him and a guy named Fritz Giesel, they established the first dental rotin genealogical laboratory in the world. And for many years, they provided practitioners with images of the jaw and the head. And old Fritz died of metastatic carcinoma, which was caused by heavy radiation exposure to his hands. And so it's just, these guys started off with doing something they had no idea the danger and the gravity of it, and it really kind of sucks to hear how they kind of died at the hands of what, gave them their career and what they spent so much time working on. Okay, and then the second one that we'll mention here is there was a distressing case reported in September of 1896 where William Levy had been shot in the head by an escaping bank robber 10 years before that. And so the bullet entered his skull just above the left ear and presumably proceeded towards the back of the head. Having heard about x-rays, he decided he had to know where that bullet was at in his head and have it taken out. So Levi, I'm not sure which one it is, he approached Professor Jones of the Physical Laboratory, University of Minnesota. And Professor Jones, he warned Levy against the exposure, but the guy was so undeterred, he still wanted to go at it, and an exposure was made on July 8th of 1896, and they were made with a tube over his forehead, in front of his open mouth and behind his right ear. And this guy sat through the exposures from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. That's 14 hours. 14 hours this guy sat with exposed radiation tubes, like, on his face, basically. And within 24 hours, his entire head was blistered. Go figure. And within a few days, his head had an angry sore, as they put it, and his lips were badly swollen, cracked, and bleeding. His right ear had doubled in size, and the hair on the right side of his head had completely fallen out. That's why I looked this stuff up, because I just like, we know so much about it now, and even though we know so much about it now, bad stuff still happens. So I was just so curious as to what would happen when they didn't even know bad stuff would happen. And this guy was just like, I have to know where this bullet's at. I've lived with it for 10 years. I mean, maybe he had crazy headaches. Maybe it made him different. I don't know. And so he just puts that stuff on his head for 14 hours. And they said his ear doubled in size. It doubled in size. Wow. I mean, okay. And so the professor, he concluded that one feature that was satisfactory to the patient, and this is ridiculous. So this guy had a sense of humor. He's like, at least we got a good picture, and they did. They found out where it was at. It does not say whether they took it out. I assume they did. But so this guy was just like, yeah, I mean, I know your ear is like 3 times what it was when you came in, and your lips are all swollen, and you got an angry sore. But I mean, we know where that bullet is now, though. So I mean, it's all for the greater good, right? And so the science of protecting ourselves from radiation grew out of probably instances like what I was just saying, and yeah, but probably just that. I mean, people, how many times can you do that before someone's like, we need to develop some sort of safety mechanism. The people who choose to make use of X-rays went about their business with pretty much little concern for the potential dangers of radiation, which is we see here. These guys, we talked about the last guy who made the dentist's office and then basically died of overexposure to radiation 30 years later. Like I said, there was nothing that told them that radioactivity could be dangerous, since it hadn't been around that long. I guess these stories had to happen for people to now know. You know what I mean? We will see that some people even thought that it was beneficial to the body, which is pretty wild given the last 2 things that I just told you guys. And often the injuries, they were not attributed to X-ray exposure, and in part because of the slow onset of symptoms. And I mean, not everybody was doing 14 hours of radioactivity. So sometimes it might take weeks or even months before some of this stuff pops up, and like I said, there was just simply no reason to suspect that X-rays were the cause of all these problems. The first people to warn of the adverse effects of X-rays actually were Thomas Edison, William Morton, and Nikola Tesla, who were some of the more enlightened individuals of that time. And they had each reported eye irritations from experimenting with X-rays and fluorescent substances. And so like the smart guys of the time were like, hey, we did this once or twice and it kind of messed us up. Maybe don't, wrap it around your face for half a day. But, to each his own, I guess. And radiography hasn't changed that much since its discovery. I mean, of course, it's modernized, you know what I mean? But the idea of it is pretty much stayed the same. A shadow image is still captured of a sample with a detector that is opposite the X-ray source. And film is still occasionally used, not glass plates anymore, I don't believe. But most of the procedures have switched over to digital. And that is how X-rays happened. But before we moved on to the next our next segments, the roundup and things I didn't know before and stuff like that, I wanted to share one more like little radiation story that I found really interesting. And some of you may have heard it, and if you have, you can skip past it. But it's about who the people called the radium girls. And this was around the early 20th century. And so radium was formerly used in self-luminous paints for watches, nuclear panels, aircraft switches, and instrument dials, other things like that. And so in the mid-1920s, a lawsuit was filed against the United States Radium Corporation by 5 dying radium girls, and they were dial painters who had painted the radium-based luminous, paint on the dials of watches and clocks. And the dial painters were instructed to lick. They were supposed to lick their brushes to give them a fine point, and that's how they ended up taking in a lot of that radium. And that's just, it's crazy when you think about it. Like we talked about earlier about people, not knowing about the effects of radiation or not caring. But it's while they were literally telling them, just put this radioactive stuff in your mouth so that we can make this product better. And their exposure to their exposure to radium caused serious health effects, which included sores, anemia, and bone cancer. This is because the body treats radium as calcium and deposits it in the bones, where radioactivity degrades marrow and can mutate bone cells. And so that was just a little tidbit, little story that I saw that I couldn't quite figure out how to fit in, but I just wanted to mention it because when I saw it, I'd heard about it, and actually they made a movie about it right before the pandemic started, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I think it kind of got lost in there, and it's called The Radium Girls, and it's about this whole issue, and I kind of want to check it out because it's a pretty interesting story when you think about it. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. X-rays were discovered in 1895 by Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. He discovered it by accident. He named them X-rays to underline the fact that their nature was unknown. Radium, in the form of radium chloride, was discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898 from ore mined in the Czech Republic. There were many trials and errors before safety procedures get implemented. Technological advances have seen the process go from glass plates to film to digital. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? Okay, so the things I didn't know before is going to operate a little bit different this time, but not that different. I ended up, of course, like I said, I didn't know any of this stuff, so all of this is things that I didn't know before. But I decided I would ask some questions, or I would mention the questions that I've asked myself, and see if I could get them answered, and then just put them in this segment. But I do have there's one also that one thing I didn't know before to kind of keep it classic. But the first question, there's only 2 of them. The first question is, are X-rays dangerous? And so I looked this up, just a straight up Google question. I'm trying to see what I can bring back from that. And basically Google says that being exposed to X-rays does carry a risk of causing cancer many years or decades later. But this is thought to be very small. An X-ray of your chest, limbs, or teeth is equivalent to a few days' worth of background radiation. And, that's cool, but I don't really know what background radiation is. I know what background noise is, right? I know what a background is, but I don't know what background radiation is. But second question, what is the difference between chemotherapy and radiation? Because when I was doing this, I was realizing I was just, there's so many different types of radiation, and then sometimes radiation is used for good. And so I was just like, well, so what is the difference? And so good old Google tells us that though chemo and radiation both attack cancer cells, they work in different ways. Chemotherapy drugs circulate in your bloodstream, and they kill or shrink cancer cells anywhere in your body, not just the site where the primary cancerous tumor starts. Because these drugs pass through your whole system, they're called systemic. Radiation treatment uses invisible bursts of energy instead of drugs. In addition, it is usually a localized treatment that aims energy beams just at the area where cancer cells actually grow. So, boom, there's your answer, kind of, pretty much. So I definitely didn't know any of that before, and I would have just assumed that all radiation is bad radiation or all radiation is good radiation, but you see, it's not all one thing. And the last one, I kind of mentioned this quickly in the actual topic segment, but it's that radium was used for what was thought to have health benefits for like a fleeting moment before everybody realized that was just not. Like as far as just ingesting it, So radium was also used in things like radium water, and at places like spas, people would go and take baths in radium water, and you can only imagine what happened after a while. And this was stopped after people learned that that was not such a good idea. All right. That's been another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. Always glad when you guys stop by and press play and come along for the ride and find out how things happen with me. I will say I tried to reach out and tried to get a guest for this. It's all new, and I shot my shot pretty big. I mean, I was trying to get anybody that worked on that movie, The Radium Girls, and maybe, I don't know if it was just the time thing. I haven't heard back yet, but I didn't give them that much time, so we'll see. I am trying to expand this stuff, and we'll see what happens in the future. I will say one last bit of news about me is I have finally started to watch the John Wick movies. If anybody is interested, I've always known they existed. I just never actually sat down and took the time. I will say they're pretty good. I'm about halfway through the third one now, and yeah, it's a pretty interesting set of movies they got there. So that's all we got going on over here. Once again, thank you for stopping by and pressing play. I'll see you guys next week.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.